Randumb Rants. Like and subscribe. See, y'all want me to go back to Cabrini Green, and that's fine. I have no problem going back there. This rant is going to be about Sweet Daddy Williams. Good times. Like I said, when you out in Cabrini, you watching that asphalt grow. It ain't really too much to look forward to. Temporary layoffs, easy credit ripoffs, scratching and surviving, hanging in a chow line. Or was it hanging out and jiving? See, very controversial line. Dave Chappelle once stumped it. Or did he? Yeah, because we have an article from the writers, allegedly, that said it was hanging out and jiving. So, we don't know, right? But that's off topic. Let's talk about this legend, though, right? You guys remember him. He was a reoccurring character on Good Times. And he's a legendary figure in Cabrini Green projects. Marion Sweet Daddy Williams. The legend. Right? And I guess y'all want me to start from the beginning, right? Because that's what we do. That's what we do. That's what we do. And I mean, Sweet Daddy, his father, he was born to Felix and Mary Lou Williams, and his upbringing, that isn't important. Let's just say he started a life of crime early. See, back then, you had something called number runners. And I know you guys, some of you guys might be familiar if you guys watched Malcolm X, or if you guys familiar with the Bumpy Johnson times, that jazz scene. Yeah, it was an underworld, from the 20s, 30s, all the way into the 60s and whatnot, right? And they had like an illegal gambling scene and whatnot, a numbers game in a sense, right? And a numbers runner was usually like a street level person. They would collect bets and whatnot for the illegal lottery. And these people were notable people in their neighborhood. They had strong mental math skills, of course. They're dealing with numbers all day, and they're dealing with other people's money all day. And with that being said, of course, they had other people's money on them. Lump sums, of course, right? And when you have lump sums of cash, you may have to have other tools, right? I guess you can read in between the lines, And the numbers game was common in cities, with black populations. Just to name a few, I guess, Washington, D.C., New York City, of course, Baltimore, and Chicago. Chicago, right? And you got to understand, to run numbers, you got to be a certain person. You got to be off the porch in a sense, right? This is a different type of era, right? This isn't just hand to hand, right? We're not talking about the 90s. No. This is a different type of era, right? You're running numbers. And we can see a picture of a young Sweet Daddy running numbers in Cabrini Green back in the day. And I know what you're thinking. You like rants, but you said that's a picture of young Sweet Daddy. That guy is old. Well, you got to understand. See, back in these days, everyone looked old. You have people like your Otis Reddings, your Martin Luther King Jr.'s, your Steve Harveys. These people, they just always looked old. Doesn't matter what age they are. And Sweet Daddy Williams fit into that category. So he's running numbers. Yeah, he looks like he's 35 in that picture. And Sweet Daddy, it's rumored that he's only about 16 in that photo. 16 years old. Yep, 16. But yeah, so Sweet Daddy's running it up, right? He's building an empire. You got to understand. He's running numbers for all of the Cabrini Green residents, okay? And I get it. I know what y'all going to say. But Rants, he not even from Cabrini Green. Sweet Daddy ain't from Cabrini Green. So I get it. Everybody knows Sweet Daddy is originally from the Horner homes in Chicago. But when he was running his gambling ring, he was running his numbers, of course, he was in Cabrini Green doing that. And that's where he made his name. Okay, so let's nip that in the bud right there, because I know how y'all get and whatnot, right? Nonetheless, though, right? And you gotta understand, see, when you're dealing with the federal government, all good things will come to an end. You know, it won't last that long, right? And Illinois was approved to launch their own state lottery in 1973. And that became official in 1974 when the first tickets were sold. Now, of course, when this happens, it crushes the numbers runners business, right? It crushes the illegal gambling circuit overnight, similar to like how the dispensaries are now, of course, right? And people had to pivot into other hustles and business ventures, right? And I don't want you to think young black males was the only people doing this. No, they have legendary older black women that was queen pins on that level, that was running numbers and whatnot. But nonetheless, though, and these former number runners, they had a lot of money, right? And of course, the smart ones invested in real estate, of course, right? But you had some that invested in small street businesses like the jukebox joints and the arcade pinball joints of yesteryear, after hour clubs, of course, and whatnot, right? But then you had Sweet Daddy Williams. Sweet Daddy Williams, he went a different route, right? Sweet Daddy Williams became a gorilla pimp and a loan shark. Yeah. See, it's a family show. So Good Times never really focused on Sweet Daddy being this gorilla pimp. Oh, but he was. You had to read in between the lines, right? And I guess we can go over the two terms real quick before we actually get into these episodes, because we will be getting to the episodes, right? But a gorilla pimp, of course. Now, eventually we'll get on the Mac. We'll talk about Goldie and Pretty Tony and all of them, right? But a gorilla pimp, they have their females, let's just say, right? But they use different tactics. Like, they may get their females on substances. You guys get what I'm saying? And they will physically abuse them, you know? That's how they do their dirt. That's how they do their pimping, I should say, right? And, Rance ain't in the game. He's not here to teach you the game, right? I'm just giving you the definitions of a gorilla pimp, you know? And then we have a loan shark. This is what you commonly saw Sweet Daddy do while he was on the show. And a loan shark is a person who offers loans at crazy, crazy high interest rates, right? And if you don't pay them back, there will be violence. There will be violence. And this is how Sweet Daddy makes his money on the show. With the exception of, gorilla pimping, of course, right? They didn't show that on the show, right? But nonetheless, he's in the pockets of many Cabrini Green's residents, right? And please don't think Sweet Daddy's coming to pay you a visit by himself. No! He's coming with Big Claude and Ernie. Yeah, the brothers with the Lamont Sanford mustaches. Yep. And they always mean business, right? And he's known in Cabrini Green. He's became a legend in a sense. People look up to Sweet Daddy Williams. He's one of them. He has all the Cadillacs. He has all the fly women. He's Sweet Daddy Williams. And I guess that leads us to the show, right? And we're going to break down, the episodes that he was featured in, of course. And of course, we'll tell you about his downfall, which is a crazy story within itself. But you guys got to stay tuned for that, right? But let's get into it. And we're blessed to start out in the James Evans Sr. era of the show, right? We're in season 13, episode 19. This episode is actually titled Sweet Daddy Williams. This is when he's introduced, right? And you see JJ, he's painting a photo, and Thelma walks in, she looks at it. Then the family comes in and they take a look, right? And of course you got Mr. James Sr. He's saying, she looks familiar. And in Florida, of course, she's like, oh Lord, Now that you mention it, she does look like someone. And, of course, the family just can't figure it out, right? Now, you got to understand, James Sr., he just came in from making slightly over minimum wage, and he wants a beer, And when he opens it, it's fizzy and it gets everywhere. And he's like, man, it's warm. And then we find out that the Evans family fridge is out, of course. The mother's praying, oh, Lord, the fridge is out, James. And then Adrian, right? She's a neighbor, right? She's a neighbor in the building. And she just walks right on in. She doesn't knock or anything, just walks right on in, right? And she sees JJ. She's like, oh, I see the Picasso is working on something. Then she strolls over there and looks and she says, oh, wow. Why are you painting Savannah James? And James is like, huh? She's like, yeah, he's painting Savannah James. That's Sweet Daddy's main fox that he's messing with right now. And James Sr. gets up. He's like, hold on, what you doing paying her? And why were you hiding that when we asked, who were you paying? And JJ tries to cover it up with a lie. But you got to understand, he's not the man of the house yet. That'll be next season, right? And James Sr. demands an answer, of course. And JJ starts to tell him, well, Sweet Daddy took a liking to my artwork. And James Sr. cuts him off. He's like, look, oh, man, like, why are you doing business with him? He's the biggest number runner in the projects. Then you got Militant Mike getting up. He's like, yeah, that's right. He's a disgrace to every black male in the community. And JJ, he's trying to convince his family. He's like, look, this is my big opportunity. Sweet Daddy is paying me to paint this. And then the nosy neighbor, Adrian, right? She's asking what Florida was actually going to ask when she left the house. She's like, well, how much you getting paid? And JJ's like, when you're dealing with Sweet Daddy, you're not allowed to discuss business transactions. So he's well trained, right? Florida and James did train him well for that, right? And then we hear a knock at the door. And Thelma opens it and we see Big Claude and Ernie step in first in case there's an ambush. And then you guys are introduced to him. Sweet Daddy Williams, right? He walks in and he's like, is JJ near? Tell him Sweet Daddy Williams is here. And he invites himself in. And James Sr., of course, steps up and he's like, well, you can invite yourself out my house. And Sweets is like, relax, baby. I'm not here for no hassle. I'm just checking on the bony rascal and this painting. And here come Florida, cursing the family with generational poverty. She's out here telling Sweet Daddy, oh, Lord, look, we don't want our son doing business with you. And Sweets is like, why not? I believe in his artwork. It's out of sight. And you got to understand, right? In the mid-70s, the 70s just in general, if someone told you anything, let's say you were in a nice pair of bell-bottom pants and whatnot, and a random person just said, hey man, those are out of sight, main man. That is a great compliment in the 70s, okay? So Sweet Daddy is saying, yeah, his art, something that he created, right, is out of sight. And James Sr. is like, well, we both feel it'd be better if you was out of sight. And Sweets go to Mike. He's like, hey, little man, you're going to be an artist like JJ when you grow up? And Mike tells him, no, I'm going to be a lawyer. And I'm going to clean up all the jive turkeys like you off the street. And Sweet Daddy walks off, and he looks at the painting and he tells JJ, he's like, hey, JJ, man, this painting is hot, dig it? Savannah's going to be back from Vegas in a couple days and she's going to be excited. Now, JJ, I'm paying you good money for this. I need 2 coats of paint. And JJ's like, anything you want, And Sweet Daddy's like, I'm parched. I'm a gorilla pimp. And I get thirsty. Do you guys got a beer? And James Sr. like, yep, we sure do. JJ, get your company a beer before he passes out. And right before he gives it to him, James Sr. makes sure he shakes the beer, right? And of course, when Sweets open it, it sprays all over his lavish gorilla pimp suit. And Sweets is like, look, it's no sweat. I got 27 more suits like this in my apartment. But that's no way to treat JJ's sponsor. And James Sr. is like, hold on, what do you mean? And Sweets shows something that's been proven in the black community for years, right? A made man will always put some money behind an up-and-coming artist from their neighborhood, right? Similar to rappers, right? And Sweets tell him, oh, yeah, I rented out the Rose Room. Yeah, that's right, the Rose Room at the Majestic Hotel. And it's going to be a one-man art show in a week featuring J.J. Evans. And Florida, she's like, oh, Lord, are you serious? And look, Sweet Daddy's like, look, I don't jive about stuff like this, Miss Evans. As a matter of fact, I called all my connects in the art world. And they're going to come to Chicago. And everyone comes when Sweet Daddy calls. And James C. is like, is this a con? And Sweets is like, look, you can call up there. And they clearly want their son to be broke so bad, right? They tell Sweets, look, I'm not sure if I want you to do business with JJ. And Sweets is like, please don't insult me. Then walks over to JJ and he's like, look, it's going to be a lot of people there and they're going to buy some artwork and you're going to be on your way, And then he looks at James Sr. He says, now it's your move, Pops. And James Sr. was about to lay hands on Sweets, but Sweets got up out of there. He told the Evans family, look, maintain y'all cool. Right? Left on out. And the family eventually agrees that JJ, being that it's an art show and whatnot, go ahead and do the business with Sweet Daddy, right? And the next day, we see Militant Michael, right? He was so anti-Sweet Daddy the day before. Oh, but now he's getting in strangers' cars. Yep. Yeah, because he's telling his mother, Sweet Daddy gave me a ride home from school in that silver and avocado Cadillac. And Mike's bragging. He's telling Thelma and his mother, he's like, yeah, it had tiger skin seats, a stereo, a TV, a built-in bar, and a telephone in the car. Just in case they run out of gas, they can dial up and order another Cadillac. And Florida, she's like, oh, Lord, don't ride with him anymore, Michael. And Thelma, she's the Cabrini green queen. She's tough, a tough fox. She tell her mother, she like, look, JJ told Sweet Daddy he couldn't even work on the painting the other day because he had to deliver chicken at his job. Sweet Daddy bought all 400 chickens from the chicken shack and then sold them back the next day to the owner for 50 cents more. Right? And then you see JJ walks in with his new threads, right? He's 70s fresh, okay? And you see, of course, Florida, where she's going to start doing. She starts praying to the Lord. Oh, Lord, he looks like a rainbow. Oh, Lord. Like, come on, Florida. Seriously, like every scene she's praying, right? But it's clear Sweet Daddy took JJ to get some new clothes, right? And then they get another knock at the door and they see it's a brand new fridge delivered to them. And this is the mid-70s, okay? This fridge got an ice maker with the crushed ice and it was filled with beer and sodas. Okay, so of course when James Sr. arrives home, he's making just above minimum wage. He grabs him a beer, then he's like, hold on, what the hell is that? And Florida's like, yeah, Sweet Daddy sent it here. And James is like, oh, this gotta go. And JJ walks out with the gators and the new threads. And James C is like, what are you wearing? And he's like, look, I'm not interfering with the new clothes and all that. Because you got the art show. But this fridge, it gotta go. It gotta get up out my house. Then we get another knock at the door. And what do you know? It's Savannah Jones. Yep. Who just touched down from Vegas, right? And she's showing off. She's like, DC 10. First class. Window seat. Sat right next to Billy Epstein. He's a real gentleman. Billy got up every time I had to use the bathroom. And, Sweet Daddy's like, yeah, this is JJ. This is the painter I was telling you about. And she's like, oh, I can tell you an artist. You look like you starving. And he shows her the painting, right? And she hates it. She hates it. She is like, you jiving me, sucker? You skinny alligator. If this purse didn't cost me $150, And mind you, it's 1976. So, Rants already got the inflation calculator out for you. And $150 is equivalent to $878 today. Yeah. But she was like, yeah, if this purse didn't cost me $150, I would smack you with it. And Florida does what any black mother's going to do. She didn't pray this time. She jumped right in that. She was like, who the hell you talking to? Oh, Lord, don't make me backhand this chick. And you see it becomes a big fiasco, right? And, she leaves. Savannah leaves, right? And this leads to Sweet Daddy canceling JJ's art exhibit. And James Sr. walks up. He's like, oh, you going back on your word? But he sees Big Claude. They strapped. Big Ernie strapped. And yeah, they went ahead and stripped JJ out of all those cool clothes he had on, stripped him down. And the parents was cool with it because they was hip that it wasn't his to begin with, right? And then he was like, yeah, I'll be back tomorrow for the fridge, And then the episode ends, right? And the next time we actually see Sweet Daddy is in season 6. But if you are a big fan of this show, like Rants, right? And you still watching this video, that means you're a big fan, right? Then you would know that we saw someone look similar in season 4, right? It was season 4, episode 13, episode called The Comedian and the Loan Shark, right? I don't know if you guys remember this episode, but yes, Sweet Daddy Williams does have a doppelganger. Stanley Bird. That's actually Sweet Daddy's second cousin, and that explains why they look so much similar. Yeah, it was the episode where JJ borrowed from some loan sharks, and Stanley Bird owned the actual comedy club and whatnot. Remember what I said? Now, Stanley wasn't on the same level as his cousin and whatnot, but he still did his thing, and he decided to invest in a little after hours spot and a nightclub and whatnot, right? And that's how he was even on this episode and whatnot. And clearly those loan sharks aren't Stanley's, because you see he has an interaction with him. He's like, man, you broke my chair and whatnot. Then he cops the plea and whatnot. So that crushes that little theory. In case you was going to be in the comments thinking that you had Rants, no. You won't win with Rants, right? But the next time we do see Sweet Daddy, and we actually touched on this, right? We go from Keith Anderson's perspective on the classic episode, the Keith Anderson episode. So we talk about him being a chronic, baiter. And he put hands when he smacked the Cabrini Green Queen. Y'all remember that episode, right? But we're going to talk about it from Sweet Daddy's perspective, okay? And you guys remember the episode. It's season 6, episode 2, 3, and 4, featuring Sweet Daddy, Florida's Homecoming. Like we already mentioned, Thelma's about to get married to Keith Anderson. And JJ's telling Thelma in Florida, he's ordering champagne and caviar for Thelma's wedding. And he's telling everyone he's about to get a bonus from his job, and he's going to pay for the majority of Thelma's wedding and whatnot, right? And JJ finds out in the next scene that he's not getting a promotion. And actually, he's being laid off. And we see Sweet Daddy's secretary in the next scene. She's telling Randumb Man with the arm sling, thank you. I'll tell Sweet Daddy you made your payment. And JJ walks in, right? Yeah, hey, man, what happened to your arm? And the dude tells him, I missed the payment. And JJ asks to speak to Sweet Daddy about a loan. And the lady's like, pocket sucker. He's not here yet. Then we see Claude and Ernie, and of course, Sweet Daddy walks in. And by now, him and JJ has a rapport, of course, now, right? And JJ's like, oh, I love your guppies. And Sweet Daddy's like, oh, these are piranhas. You can pet one. Yeah, Sweet Daddy had piranhas in the late 70s, And then they sit down and they talk about some business. And JJ tells him, my sister's getting married, Thelma. And Sweet Daddy's like, yes, I heard. It's going to be the biggest social gathering of the season. Then he pulls him close in a threatening manner. He's like, well, tell me something. Why wasn't the godfather of the ghetto invited? And then JJ's like, well, Thelma didn't have you on the invite list. And Sweet Daddy's like, I don't know why. I'm the largest donator to the hospital. Besides the money I donate, I provide them with the most patients too. And JJ's like, well, I'll see if I can get you invited. And Sweet Daddy starts laughing. He's like, what? You gonna see what you can do? Boy, don't you understand? When Sweet Daddy asks for a favor, you don't see what you can do. You see what you can done. And JJ's like, okay, look, you're invited, Then he's like, well, what about the loan, Sweet Daddy? And Sweet Daddy tosses him. He's like, how much you need? He's like, I need 1,000. And Sweet Daddy tosses him 1,000, what is equivalent to 4,700 in today's money. Okay? And JJ asks him, is it going to be the usual interest? 6 for 5, which is about 20% and whatnot. And Sweet Daddy's like, excuse me? No, inflation's went up. Nah, it's going to be 8 for 5. And JJ like, what? With that rate, I'm going to be paying for the rest of my life. And Sweet's like, if you don't, it's going to be a short-term loan. And then we see the family getting emotional, before Thelma's wedding and whatnot, right? Then we get a knock at the door. And it's Sweets. He's like, damn, JJ, that's rude. You're not going to invite me in? And JJ's like, well, it's bad luck to see the bride. And Sweet's like, I'm not getting married to her. Plus, I did pay for the wedding. And JJ tries to flee, of course, but Claude and Ernie, they're there, of course, right? And Sweets is like, look, man, you ain't tell me you lost your job. Now I'm going to need my bread that you owe me, And JJ says, look, I'm going to pay you back. And Sweets is like, I know you're going to pay me back. See, I heard from Tight Lip Mary that Thelma's marrying a $1 million football star. So I'll be using him as collateral. And I come bearing gifts. And he gives JJ a gift for Thelma. Then he passes JJ a gift. He's like, here's one for you. JJ's like, what's this? Sweets is like, oh, that's the jawbone of the last sucker that didn't pay me my money. Okay? And then, of course, we see Sweet Daddy arrive at the wedding, right? And Walona's like, my. I know I'm in a church, but this is the first time I saw a walking stained glass window. And Sweet, he has so much confidence. He's like, oh, she's just jealous, She's not as pretty as me. And then he sees JJ. He's like, what's up, JJ? And JJ hits him with the signature, hi, Sweets. And then, of course, the wedding starts, right? And Mike starts singing, of course, right? Here we are on earth together. It's just you and I. God has made us fall in love. It's true. I really found someone like you. You and I. Y'all know Mike get to sing it, right? Y'all know how Mike get, right? And then, of course, right, the infamous happens, right? Keith doesn't have any awareness. You guys already know, we covered this already. JJ's taking a picture and Keith trips over JJ, right? And we see that everybody is looking down and concerned. They're like, oh no, he's hurt, And Keith is like, oh, he's on the ground, like squirming. And JJ's looking down. He's like, oh, no. And Sweet Daddy looks up at him. He's like, JJ, my man, you are in trouble. And now we're back in the Evans household, right? And Keith, of course, we already discussed, he's treating JJ like dirt, because he didn't have the awareness to juke, right? And Florida gives the family a football coach-like speech. Telling everybody, this isn't the 17th time this family's had troubles, Lord. We're gonna fight through this, Lord. Things is gonna get better. Oh, but what they didn't know was Sweet Daddy was listening through the door, because he busted right in and said, not necessarily, Miss Evans. And Florida says, oh, Lord, I don't appreciate you coming in here uninvited. And Sweets is like, you're right. Where's my manners? And then snaps his fingers and says, Claude. And then Claude says, inviting Sweet Daddy. And Florida threatens him, oh, Lord, I'm going to call the police. But Sweet Daddy tells her, oh, they're in my apartment right now. They're playing cards over there. Now, I only came over here to give sympathy to the injured one. And Keith says, oh, thanks. And he's like, oh man, I don't know you. Meat beater? I don't know you, Keith. I seen you play a couple times, but I don't know you. I'm talking about JJ. And JJ comes clean, because Florida's like, why are you going to injure JJ? But JJ has to come clean. He's like, look, I borrowed $1,000. And Sweet Daddy like, oh, tell her about the $400 a week interest, though. And Florida's like, oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. You're nothing but a robber. And Sweet's like, no. I like to think of myself as a provider to the needy. See, I like to have my bread with extra slices. And Florida's like, oh, Lord. Look, this family pays its debts. You're going to get your $1,000, but you're not getting 1 cent of that interest. Oh, Lord, you dig? And Sweet's is like, huh? Miss Evans, that's how I make my money, baby. Plus, I have an image out here. And Mike says, you don't have an image. And Sweets is like, you so funny, you little feminine boy. I'll remember that if you ever grow up. Then he orders Claude and Ernie to break JJ's bones, and the family stands up for him. Even Keith, the meat beater, right? He tells Sweets, who the hell you think you are, you overdressed termite? And Sweets is like, yeah, all right, okay, all right. Let's trash this place so I can collect my stuff. And then Keith is like, hold on. I got an All-American ring. Claude tests it out, and we find out that it's fake. Yeah, Keith has a fake All-American ring, right? And then Thelma offers to give up her bad luck wedding pendant. Yep, that she got, from her mother right before the wedding, right? And Florida tells Sweets, she's like, oh, Lord. My mother gave me that locket, and I waited forever to give that to my daughter. But you can have it if you feel big and bad, just so I can have my son back. And he gives the locket back. Sweet Daddy does have a heart, right? He says, Sweet Daddy mother had a locket like that, and it meant a lot to me. But you know what? I'm going to settle for $1,000, no interest. And if anybody tell me Sweet Daddy soft out here, I'm coming back to raise hell. You understand me? And then Sweet Daddy left, And we see Sweet Daddy 2 more times in Good Times. We see him season 6, episode 10, The Witness, which we're about to discuss quickly. Then we see him season 6, episode 16, Blood Will Tell. And we'll touch on that too. Then, of course, we'll get to the end, right? Now, season 6, episode 10, of course, The Witness. It starts off where JJ, he witnesses an accident before the episode even starts, right? And he walks in and he's telling everybody he was on Michigan Avenue buying some art supplies, and he saw a female in a pink Cadillac run a red light, then make an illegal U-turn and then hit a cab. And JJ's like, if the cab company wants my testimony, they're going to have to pay me. And in this latter season especially, Michael is probably at his most annoying stage. He knows everything, right? Michael tells JJ, no, if you could pay for someone's testimony, then they'll be able to say anything, and that's unethical. And Walona's cooking, of course, at the Evans household because Florida isn't there, right? She's only there on selected episodes. Apparently she has a beef with JJ, and that's neither here nor there, right? That's off Rant's topic, right? But Walona was carrying this show at one point, right? And anyway, JJ and Walona's talking, and you hear a knock at the door, and of course, it's Claude and Ernie. And then, they come in first, and then Sweet Daddy busts in, of course, and there's no knocking. And he's stunting as usual. He tell Walona and JJ, oh, no, these are morning clothes. See, I just came back from a funeral. And JJ asks who? And Sweets was like, oh, I don't know the name of that cat, but he was client 267. See, he was a little bit late on his payment, and I sent him a reef saying RIP, return interest and principal. Because, Sweet Daddy's a businessman, right? And then he tells JJ, like, yeah, I heard your mother out of town, so I don't got to deal with the sympathy and the prayer card from her, Then he helps himself to Walona's food, And she's like, well, what are you doing around here? We don't owe you no more money because they paid him back from the wedding, right? And Sweets get into JJ face, applying a little pressure and whatnot, asking JJ about the accident, of course. But Penny kicks Sweet Daddy in the leg, right? And this is the only time you will see Sweet Daddy get harmed throughout this whole series. And Sweets is already aware. He's like, that's Michael's little sister. Now I can hold her for ransom, but it's not really worth the hassle. So he checks his diamond sock suspenders, right? And Walona and Penny gets up out of there because, Penny don't know that Sweets, and she really don't know what he's capable of. Michael got some money, but that might work in Sweet's favor. See, we in Chi-Town. That's Cabrini Green. But nonetheless though, right? So getting back, Sweets is threatening JJ and whatnot, telling them that, I heard you was a witness to a pink Cadillac hitting a taxi over in Michigan Avenue. Then he was like, you're aware of Savannah Morgan, right? It's like, her birthday is today. And guess what I got her? A pink Cadillac. Did you know that? And Sweet Daddy, of course, uses force, right? And they practice the story, and JJ is like, well, the pink Cadillac was driving down Michigan Avenue, and suddenly a reckless taxi blindsided her. And Sweet Daddy's like, okay. Now make sure, if the police or the insurance agency come over, you tell them that same story. And JJ's like, but Sweet Daddy, you putting words in my mouth. And he lets JJ know, hey, it's either words or you're going to have knuckles in your mouth. So you can pick one. And while he's about to leave, of course, Michael's walking in. And Sweet Daddy asks him, hey, little Mike, you still studying law? And Mike says, yeah. And when I become a lawyer, I'm going to make sure I take down you and your Jive Turkey crew down first. And Sweet Daddy's like, this little feminine boy, he didn't have this same energy when I had him in my silver and avocado Cadillac, right? But nonetheless, they leave, right? And then you see Keith and Thelma walking in. And we see Keith has an arm sling going, right? And I know what you're thinking if you're a random. I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking he hurt himself in that bathroom again. But no, that's not the case this time, right? That's not the case, right? This was actually his first day driving a cab. He finally got a job, right? And you wouldn't believe what happened. A pink Cadillac rear-ended him on Michigan Avenue. And Mike is like, hey, JJ witnessed that. And now, of course, Keith and Thelma are happy because JJ is basically saving his job, right? And it puts JJ in a pickle, of course, right? And JJ tells Thelma, like, yeah, I ain't see anything, right? And Thelma's mad, right? And Mike and Walona, they figure it out. They like, oh, well, Sweet Daddy girl Savannah Morgan. Because it's a different Savannah now. It's Savannah Morgan. It's not Savannah, what was it, Jones at one point? No, it's Savannah Morgan now, right? And Mike and Walona is like, oh, well, Sweet Daddy girl drives that Cadillac. So he probably came over and, intimidated you into changing your story and whatnot, right? And of course, JJ is like, huh? Who, me? Nobody intimidates me. I float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. And clearly, of course, just like in the last scene, right? Well, the last episode, right? Sweet Daddy's listening at the door again. Because he walks right in and finishes. He's like, and if you don't tell a story right, you're going to have to answer to me. It's jive talk. So if it rhymed, it made sense. See, this is before rap music. So jive talking and that rhyming, like that Dolomite talking, people love it. They were eating it up in the 70s, right? So nonetheless, right? Sweets tell JJ, hey, look, the man is on his way to question you. And JJ is like, when? But of course he has no time to prepare because this is a sitcom. And you see the insurance man from the cab company walks in, right? And then, of course, Sweets is telling JJ, go ahead, tell the insurance man, the story. But Keith just so happens to walk out. And Sweets, using old school tactics, he get Claude and Ernie. He like, yeah, go ahead and crush Keith. We need him. Yeah, we go ahead and beat him up. But Mike jumps in. He's like, yeah, intimidating a witness is a criminal offense. See, he's super annoying. He knows everything, right? Hey, intimidating a witness is a criminal offense. Like, all right, Mike, And then they end up having a disposition right there in Cabrini Green, right? Right in the living room, right? And JJ is clearly under duress, right? And Sweets pulls him to the side and threatens him again, guerrilla style. Just like, how he goes with his pimping, And JJ goes back under oath and tells the truth. He's like, yeah, Savannah Morgan can't drive. She hit the cab and whatnot, right? And Sweets is like, oh, I'm about to get this dude a beat down. But then Savannah walks in, right? Savannah Morgan walks in, right? And she just walks right into the Evans household without knocking. We don't even know how she knows where JJ lives, you know? But we also find out another thing, right? Very important in this episode. Sweet Daddy has a type. He likes loud, dark-skinned, groovy women named Savannah. Yeah. Yep. But anyway, Savannah busts in, right? And she ruins the whole case. She tells everybody, yeah, I hit the taxi, you know. And then she says, yeah, Sweet Daddy, I'm leaving you for Big Elroy Mitchell, who promised her a 1979 Maserati off the showroom floor. And Big Elroy was getting money back in the day. He was competing with Sweet Daddy, and Sweet Daddy knew it, you know. So she leaves, right? And Sweet Daddy starts snitching to the insurance people. Was like, yeah, Savannah don't have a license, and she's blind in one eye. You know, and I can't really blame Sweet Daddy, right? But the last time we see him, of course, is mentioned, season 6, episode 16, Blood Will Tell, right? And we see Thelma and Keith. They're about to have some freaky time in the projects, right? Because nobody's home, and everybody know Keith didn't marry Thelma for her cooking. Everybody knows that, right? And before they can even start, they get a knock on the door. And of course, you see Claude and Ernie again. But this time, it's not Sweet Daddy Williams. No, no, no. It's Leroy Bad News Jones, right? And he's smoking in the Evans household. You know, I don't think we've ever seen anyone do that, right? And he tells everyone, yeah, you know, I'm looking for JJ. You know, I mean business. And JJ walks in, of course, with Mike. And they tell him, yeah, Sweet Daddy needs you at the hospital ASAP, right? And in the next scene, we see Sweet Daddy with a decked out motorized wheelchair, right? With the TV, red plush. You see the fuzzy dice, the fluffy carpet seats. And then JJ arrives, right? And then you guys officially find out, of course, that his first name is Marion. And JJ uses it against him. He's like, hey, Marion. And you know, Sweet's like, look, nobody calls me Marion but Rants and Sweet Daddy Mother. You know, he laid down law right then and there, right? And then he tells JJ, look, you know he talking third person, right? So he like, look, Sweet Daddy gonna need a blood transfusion. And I heard through the projects, because, you know, he always hear through the projects, right? He was like, yeah, I heard that you, JJ, me and you, we got this same blood type. And it's a rare blood type called U+. And, you know, after some convincing, and I'm not even going to lie to you guys, he offered him $1,000, right? Which is equivalent to the $4,700 as mentioned earlier, right? And JJ was like, all right, well, I'll give you some blood. You know, if you're going to give me that $1,000, I'm going to use it towards my college fund. But little does JJ know, right? Little does JJ know. Leroy Bad News Jones got plans to take over the projects. Yeah, he's going to take over the projects. He's going to take over Sweet Daddy's Loan Shark company, and he's going to take over his stroll business. You guys, you know, I mentioned that gorilla pimping, right? And, you know, he needs Sweet Daddy to pass away, right? He desperately needs it. And he knows Sweet Daddy needs that blood transfusion, right? So right before JJ is about to go to the hospital, Leroy Bad News Jones pays JJ a visit. And he offers him 2 tickets anywhere. He's like, yeah, you know, I got $5,000 for you. Go buy 2 plane tickets anywhere, man. It's the 70s, you know. It's like, yeah, you know, you can go anywhere with this $5,000, right? How about you take your girl to the Virgin Islands or something? And JJ was like, huh? Oh, you must not be familiar with my girls. See, my girls don't fit the criteria to go to Virgin Islands. Yeah, I'm ugly, but I'm a poon hound. How you think I got the name Kid Dynamite? Yeah, I had a bad Debbie Allen shooting up in the bathroom. Y'all remember that episode? Yeah. And then JJ takes the tickets due to Bad News having his friend Roscoe on him. And you guys see Roscoe, right? And then we see that today is the day of the blood transfusion, right? And you see Sweet Daddy, he's waiting on JJ, and Leroy Bad News Jones, he's telling Sweets, he was like, man, I should have known JJ wasn't going to come, buttering him up, And we see Sweet Daddy, he getting desperate. He's going to Florida Evans route. He starts praying to the Lord. He's like, yeah, Lord, I'll give this hospital $10K, which is equivalent to $46,000 in today's money. It's 1979 now. He says he's going to get at the hospital $10K. He was like, yeah, if you answer my prayers, I really need this blood, And what do you know? Right after JJ walks in, and Sweets is like, my prayers have been answered. And he's like, Sweets, I never go back on a deal. I'm going to write this check for $20 and it's going to be in the mail today. And of course, Bad News is looking crazy. He's over acting. He's showing the junk. Like, all right, Sweet Daddy can see you, man. Like, move. Let JJ say his lines. You feel me? And then JJ tells Sweets, yeah, I decided not to take that plane trip. And Sweets was like, huh? What you talking about? And then takes the envelope from JJ and was like, this is $5K, which is equivalent to $23,000. So he gave JJ $23,000 to go somewhere, and he like, so you gave, hold on. Sweet Daddy like, hold on. Bad News, you gave JJ $5,000 of my money to go out of town? And then, of course, he sicks Claude and Ernie on Leroy Bad News Jones, and he tells them, he's like, yeah, put him on 3 different planes, meaning, of course, to dismember him, right? And Sweets asked JJ, he was like, man, a lot of people, man, would have let Sweet Daddy transition for the $5K. What made you come back? And JJ was like, well, I thought about it. And if something happens to you, then Bad News is going to run the projects. And I just chose the lesser of the 2 evils. I'm used to dealing with you. You give decent interest rates. You work with my mother and whatnot. And then, of course, they do the blood transfusion now, right? And that's the last time you see Sweet Daddy on the show. Of course, the Evans family, they move out the projects. Of course, Wallone and Penny, they move out too. Keith, he gets signed to the Bears. We've already discussed that, right? But Sweet Daddy's story isn't over. No, that was just the last time you saw him on that show. So you guys got to remember, Sweets is a loan shark, right? He's a gorilla pimp. And Cabrini Green, that's located in Chicago, right? And y'all know Cabrini Green, they produce Mad Dog. They even produce Candyman. But what y'all never cared to put together, and I know Sweets is going to be mad. He's going to hate that I told y'all this, right? But yeah, Chicago PD had a 3-year investigation on marrying Sweet Daddy Williams. Yeah, starting in like 78, right? So it was actually going on through, during the show and whatnot, right? And let me tell you guys how there's a sitcom god, right? Because this is Rants. This is why you came here. And I'm glad you guys even waited this long in the video, right? Because you guys are in for a treat. So, as mentioned before, Chicago PD has an investigation on Sweet Daddy. And they eventually take down one of his escorts, right? And she doesn't know any better. She starts squealing. She's squealing, right? And what you guys don't know is Carl Winslow arrested Sweet Daddy. He took down the whole org. Yep, the whole organization. You would be surprised, right? And you guys never put that together. But where was Carl Winslow working when he first got on the force? Of course they put him in the hood. Yeah, they put him right in Cabrini Green, right? Of course they did. Yeah. And he would lock up, petty gang members and whatnot. But how did you think he got his first promotion? Oh, my goodness, man. I'm so glad you guys, like and subscribe to the ranch, because you guys are getting stuff like this. Yeah, Carl Winslow arrested Sweet Daddy Williams. How do you know this, Rants? How do you know this? You swear you know every damn thing. I know, I hear it all the time, right? But me and my man Al Lou and my man Sweet Daddy Williams, as you can see, we go to the Golden Corral all the time. Yeah. Sweet Daddy's a big fan of their desserts. Yeah, I pay for him, He got it, but Rants pay for him, though. That's my OG. And he tells me these stories, from back in the day and whatnot. Now, I couldn't really get into those, real gruesome stories and whatnot. But yeah, Carl Winslow locked him up and whatnot, Oh, and I almost forgot. You wouldn't even believe who was the state attorney on Sweet Daddy's case back in the day. Like and subscribe, Randumb Rants, man.